Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive.
Always.
Today, we're tackling something that I think pretty much everyone who has ever worked on a project, big or small, has encountered at some point.
Oh, I know exactly where you're going with this.
Yep, scope creep. It's that sneaky thing where a project just seems to grow and grow beyond what you initially planned.
And it can be a real headache, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And we actually found this crazy stat. Apparently, over half of all projects end up experiencing scope creep.
Wow, 52%, that's a lot.
It really is. So today, we're going to explore the psychology behind scope creep. And to help us with that, we're digging into this really interesting article.
Yeah, this one by 𝗀𝗍𝗲𝗃 called The Hidden Psychology of Scope Creep and Stakeholder Behaviors. I found this one super insightful.
Me too. It's not just about the practicalities of project management, but really gets into like the human factors at play. Understanding all of this can honestly be a game changer for how you approach projects.
Couldn't agree more. So let's jump right in.
All right, so 𝗀𝗍𝗃 makes this great point right off the bat. He says that scope creep is often more about psychology than just like features and functionality.
Yeah, that really resonated with me too. It's so important to understand the motivations of everyone involved, the stakeholders.
For sure. And that leads us right into one of the first psychological factors that 𝗀𝗍𝗃 talks about, the endowment effect. You familiar with this one?
Oh, yeah, the endowment effect. It's basically this thing where we tend to overvalue things that we own or create. And that doesn't just apply to physical objects, even ideas.
It's wild, right?
Right.
So how do you see this play out in the context of projects?
Well, imagine you have a stakeholder who's come up with an idea for the project, right? They're naturally going to be very attached to it. They might see it as absolutely essential, even if objectively it's not really core to the project's goals.
Oh, I've seen this happen so many times. Have you ever dealt with this firsthand?
Absolutely. It's actually really common. I remember this one software project where a stakeholder was totally convinced that this super complex reporting feature was absolutely crucial. On paper, it sounded impressive, but honestly, it just ended up diverting resources from, the core functionalities.
Ouch.
Yeah, the launch ended up being delayed by months because of it.
The classic case of good intentions gone wrong.
Oh.
Okay, so moving on. 𝗀𝗍𝗃 also points to FOMO, the fear of missing out, as another big driver of scope creep.
Oh, yeah, FOMO. It's everywhere these days, right?
It really is. And especially in like fast-paced industries, there's this constant pressure to keep up with the competition. So you see someone else adding all these fancy new features to their product, and suddenly your project feels, I don't know, incomplete without them.
Right, even if those features don't actually align with your original goal.
Exactly. It's like, you know that feeling when you see everyone on social media posting about the latest gadget and you're like, wait, I need that too, even though you were perfectly happy 5 minutes ago.
Totally.
But on a project level, this kind of thinking can be really dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. It can create this never-ending cycle of just adding more and more stuff, diluting the focus of the project, and just stretching the team way too thin.
Okay, so we've talked about the endowment effect. We've talked about FOMO. 𝗀𝗍𝗃 brings up another sneaky culprit, something he calls the illusion of unlimited resources.
Ah, yes. The classic, it's just a small change.
Ugh, tell me about it. It's amazing how often those small changes pop up.
Yeah.
And we've probably all been guilty of saying that phrase ourselves at some point.
Wait, absolutely. But here's the thing. What might seem like a tiny addition can actually have these ripple effects throughout the entire project.
Oh, yeah.
Suddenly, timelines get stretched, budgets go way over, and the team is just constantly playing catch-up. And let's not forget about team morale. It can really take a hit when people feel like they're constantly being asked to do more and more.
It's so true. And even on a personal level, right? I'm sure we've all had those times where we think, well, this one little extra task, it's not a big deal. But then it just snowballs into this whole thing.
All the time.
Okay, so we've uncovered some of the psychology driving scope creep, and it can feel a little, well, daunting. But thankfully, 𝗀𝗍𝗃 doesn't just leave us hanging. He gives some really solid advice on how to actually manage this whole thing.
Right. He outlines 4 key strategies, and they all revolve around, being proactive, communicating effectively, and setting those boundaries.
Yes. So let's break them down. The first strategy is all about communicating the impact of scope changes.
Right. So instead of just, shutting down a stakeholder's request, you take the time to actually explain how that small change that they're asking for could impact the timeline, the budget, maybe even other features that are actually, more important.
I love that. Transparency is so key. And to help everyone prioritize effectively, 𝗀𝗍𝗃 suggests using frameworks like the Moscow method.
Ugh, the Moscow method. It stands for must-haves, should-haves, could-haves, and won't-haves, and it's such a useful tool for getting everyone on the same page.
Right. It's basically a way to categorize different features or requirements based on their level of importance. So, the must-haves, those are the things that are absolutely essential to the project's success. Then you have the should-haves, which are important, but not necessarily deal breakers. Could-haves are nice to have, but can be cut if needed. And won't-haves are those things that are definitely out of scope.
It's such a simple but effective way to make those tough decisions.
Okay, what's the next strategy?
The third one is about fostering empathy.
Ooh, I like that.
It's all about encouraging stakeholders to understand the team's constraints, see the human side of things.
Yeah, reminding them that it's not just a list of tasks. There are actual people with, limited time and energy working on these things.
Absolutely. When stakeholders really grasp that, they tend to be much more understanding. They're more likely to work collaboratively and within the project's, boundaries.
And that brings us to 𝗀𝗿𝗲𝗲𝗽𝗲 final strategy, setting clear boundaries from the get-go.
Yeah. Define that project scope early on, be firm about those boundaries, and really importantly, document any changes along the way.
Yes. Good documentation can save you so much trouble down the line.
It protects both the project and the team.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the psychology that often leads to scope creep and look at some really solid strategies for managing it effectively.
And hopefully this has given you some food for thought for your own projects.
Totally. But before we wrap up completely, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, go for it.
Even when you have the best strategies in place, communication is great, documentation is on point, it's important to remember that power dynamics and organizational culture can play a massive role in project success.
That is so true.
Sometimes navigating those unspoken rules and expectations can be the trickiest part of all of this.
I think a lot of people would agree with you on that. It's not always just about the features. It's about understanding the whole human landscape of a project.
So true. Now, we want to hear from you. What are your experiences with scope creep? Any strategies that you've found particularly helpful? Share your thoughts, and let's keep this conversation going.
Absolutely. We always love hearing from you.
All right, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time.
See you then.